So here I'm going to talk about the future of IoT and what the role of developers in that and how they're shaping it. We've been analyzing IoT and developers for a long time, and I'll tell you about that, but let me jump straight in. So, a lot of how IoT works today, both technology and business models, has been directly influenced by mobile. And you probably have first-hand experiences of that with the components on the technology side, but the business model side is exactly the same. So let's look at the business model side. Here you see a timeline of handset shipments by platform, developer-centric platforms such as iOS and Android versus what would you would argue is manufacturer-centric or feature-centric platforms, helping handset makers build better handsets. And we all know how that went. This was the introduction, of course, of the two platforms. The handsets here, you would add Symbian there, of course, but the handsets here declined because, firstly, there was a shortage of apps to deploy on them, and what Microsoft today is probably calling the app gap on Windows. But also that these devices were enterprise first, as opposed to these devices that were consumer first. And as we saw with technology, technology adoption today is mostly driven by consumers. So the two lessons here is, one is developer first products will generate all the use cases that consumers will adopt eventually, and consumer first products are easier to adopt. And in fact, enterprise first platforms lose out. So lesson from mobile, again, focus on developers. Wins. Now, it's not just mobile. In almost every other vertical, you see examples. So I mentioned about Apple and iOS. Windows, probably the role model of a platform. Twilio has pretty much shown to telcos how do you build new use cases out of SMS and voice by letting developers innovate on top of those. Under Armour is doing interesting things with fashion and using developers and apps to engage athletes and sports fans. Salesforce overtook Oracle, we would argue largely because of the ability to use developers to extend Salesforce and the Salesforce store. I think App Exchange it's called, where you can... so basically they allow you to both extend the power of Salesforce, but also integrate it into your own infrastructure. And all of these other companies, some of them I will mention further. Now, if you look at the timeline of the previous two platforms I showed earlier, we would argue that IoT is around 2009 in mobile years. So the first few platforms have arrived, smartphone platforms, wearable platforms, car platforms, and so on. And they're competing with some standards-based platforms like from car manufacturers or from incumbent smart home producers and so on. And clearly, again, you see the first set focuses on features and the other set focuses on developers. And I'll give you examples of those that focus on developers. But we will see, the message here is we will see a concentration of power over time on the platforms that are developer-centric. So already in wearables we see Apple Watch and Android Wear, which clearly superior in terms of number of apps. Fadell came a lot earlier. There are about 1,400 apps excluding watch faces. And the stuff you can do with apps on Apple Watch and Android Wear is of course superior. Developers are also building apps for all of these brands. And we have a quote here from Tony Fadell, Nest CEO now, Google. And he says that the order of magnitude of things that are going to be built on top of smart home platforms is going to be the same order of magnitude as the stuff that's being built on mobile in terms of number of apps. And the other thing worth observing here is that all of these are developer-centric. In fact, in smart home, it's becoming the rule for products to be developer-centric. So it's an interesting discussion for Minute as well. Developers are conquering the car. So, of course, you have CarPlay and Android Auto, but you have all of these startups working with OBD2 connectors and letting developers build stuff on top. One of the most interesting examples, I think, is Automatic. So Automatic has such an OBD2 connector. They basically have some off-the-shelf services that let you save money on gas, diagnose your engine, remember where you parked, and so on and so forth. But after they launched the product, what they did is they connected it to IFT, if this and that, and they saw over 300 recipes emerge for all of these things without any investment from them, but and without even launching a developer platform, without having dedicated APIs. They just connected their they provided triggers to IFT. And so people build stuff that does trip logging, so logs onto Evernote where your trip started or ended, sends an SMS if something's wrong with your engine, tracks your location on Google Maps, checks you in on different social networks based on where you are, turns on your thermostat when you arrive at home with your car, and so on and so forth. So relatively straightforward. Applications and services that could be either funny or very niche to more broad cases. As it turns out, Automatic got a fairly large investment from two types of companies. One is car insurance companies, and the other is car services companies. So through this exploration, they also found out interesting use cases and where their scalability and biggest valuation will come from. And again, this is fairly easy to do, so you don't need to have a fully fledged developer program. You just use the infrastructure built from IFT. You see similar phenomena with drones. Drones started out in the military, but the drones you see today shipping are essentially hobbyist. The technology designed for hobbies, which eventually found its way into enterprise and all sorts of verticals: photography, real estate, surveying, security, and so on. The biggest drone companies are Chinese, and they're building platforms on top of drones. So stuff that you can build apps for your drone, and that you can extend the product beyond what it was originally designed for. So yet another area of IoT where developers will be identifying some of the maybe craziest but also bigger opportunity use cases. Similar quote from Michael Perry of DJI. There's a lot of industrial use cases that DJI can't build the software for, but we have others that will actually take the risk and experiment, and some of them will work and some of them will not, but everybody wins at the end. So this is the stuff we do, and we've done two major polls or two major surveys of IoT developers. Some of the data I'll present right after, but it surfaced as these 4 reports. Total of 7,000 IoT developers, 140 countries, and we benchmarked, I think, well over 70 platforms. In other words, we analyzed them in those reports and analyzed the landscape in industrial IoT, smart home, and wearables. In terms of size, so we estimate there is 4.5 million IoT developers today. Pretty large numbers. I'll tell you where they come from, which is the interesting bit. Growing by about 17% annually. And even this you would argue is conservative. And where do they come from? They're actually very diverse, but they are moving in from different other sectors. A lot of them are coming from mobile, a lot of them are coming from cloud, So here you see that percentage of developers involved in IoT mobile apps and cloud development. Sample size fairly high, 11,000 developers. And you see that 37% of IoT developers are involved also in cloud and mobile apps. But typically you have people who work on one sector like mobile and then have a moonlighting or hobby on another, on IoT or cloud and then IoT or desktop and IoT and so on. So just people like experimenting and doing stuff, and IoT is still a very early stage ecosystem, so it has I think the majority or over 50% of developers are hobbies and explorers. That means segments who care about fun, sense of achievement, creativity, ability to learn, rather than who are there to necessarily make a living. And that's because it's an early stage ecosystem, so things will evolve, much like Android and much like the mobile web, where the pros who care about reach and money now dominate the segment makeup of these ecosystems. In terms of verticals, we asked developers which vertical are you working on. This is from the 9th wave, which we run in May. So about 3,000 developers, or just over 3,000 developers. Blue is for targeting, dotted blue is for planning to target, and gray is no plans to target. So smart home is by far the one where you have most developer interest, and already you saw there's a bunch of platforms, just 10 plus, which you saw logos for earlier, followed by retail, industrial IoT, wearables, smart city, medical, connected car, and so on. And it's just access to market. That access to market and access to users is one of the main reasons developers prefer smart home. From an earlier survey from the 8th wave, we looked at which are the top platforms per segment. So this is smart home, health, wearables, and connected car. And you see the usual suspects who have existing mobile ecosystems that dominate developer preference. So SmartThings, Nest, HomeKit, Android Wear, Samsung Gear, WatchKit, and so on and so forth. So Apple, Google, Samsung dominate top 3 in terms of what developers are currently targeting, or what IoT developers are currently targeting across these verticals. And this is because although the current problems being solved are mostly technical, developers prefer those platforms because they give them the user reach. And of course product reach. Now, moving on, a few companies are using developers to extend their product and business model. So I mentioned how companies are using developers to extend their product before. This is more of a giving you more example and more of a framework to think of that. So a business model you can define as ways of creating, delivering, and capturing value, and this is a fairly standard definition. I think it's also how it's currently defined on Wikipedia. It's how Osterwalder defines it. But for each part of this business model, you can use developers to extend that. So, for example, you can have developers as customers, and Twilio, and Amazon, and Azure, and so on. So basically, you charge developers for providing services. You can have developers as extenders. So this is the automatic case. So where they use developers to extend the use cases of their product. You can even say, here's a new fire alarm or whatever, and I can use developers to provide partnership, to explore partnerships with that product. So I can connect with lots of other products. If I expose some triggers or APIs, then I will allow third parties, i.e. developers, to figure out ways of connecting my product with other products in other verticals even, without me taking any risk. Value delivery is interesting. So here you use developers as a distribution for reaching new users and new markets. So a couple of good examples. Walgreens has an API where Walgreens has huge retail spaces in the US. And they offer an API where you can have a photo that exists within your app, to have it printed in the Walgreens store. So you say you're building a photo app, and you can use a Walgreens API to send that photo to Walgreens to be printed. The customer goes to Walgreens, picks up the photo, developer gets a kickback, and Walgreens wins as well because the user is in the store. So they have acquired a new user through a third party. So the third party, which is a developer, is a distributor or reseller who connects Walgreens to end users. And Amazon Associates is exactly the same thing. What's most interesting with Amazon is their mobile affiliates API. So you can build an app that connects the Amazon e-commerce store with pretty much everything else. So any app you build, you can source e-commerce goods from Amazon, and you can build a custom app like a memorabilia, 70s sports memorabilia, for example, and you can source the goods from Amazon and just build the app. But they're using developers as distributors and resellers to sell the stuff they already have on their stock. So in IoT and beyond, developers are not just the innovators or the entrepreneurs or the hacker guys or the guys that you just need to schmooze with, but they are really about extending your business model in all of these well understood and proven ways. So 2 lessons. One is, if you want to see where IoT is going, you need to understand how what developers are doing today and what types of developers are working on IoT and which verticals and what platforms and so on. But even more importantly, and this is for product companies, if your product is not designed to be developer first, then it's designed with a handicap. In other words, if you look at IoT, there's smart home, wearables and so on. It's now becoming the rule to have products become extensible out of the box, or platform extensible out of the box, through whatever means, whether it's IFT or your own developer program and the APIs. So if you're not doing that, you're a step behind the competition, and the competition has essentially cheaper ways of identifying use cases, markets, partners, and extensions for the product. So, we have gone from a case of early 90s where developers are like, the innovators and just the cool guys, to a case where they now need to be a component of every connected computing device or device that is connected and has computing capability. So that's the end of my talk. And as it happens, we're now running the 10th developer survey. We're reaching out about to 25,000 developers annually. This year we are also putting a focus on national trend survey. So by taking part in the survey, you're also going to get back a bunch of stuff, prizes and there's geek prizes and what have you. But also you get the benchmark of what other developers in Sweden are doing, for example, if you're based in Sweden, or how are you doing as a developer versus other developers in the same country, and so on and so forth. So it's developereconomics.com, and you need to look for the banner at the top left. And that's me. I think my email and Twitter handle is on there, Andreas Con, and that's what we do. So hopefully that was interesting. Thank you.